Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of this absolutely gorgeous Iowa day to spend some time with us. We have, I think, a great program in store for you today, a continuation from last week, which we'll get into here in just a minute. But my name is Jim Hoffman, and I'm a volunteer with the Monarch Research Project, helping to coordinate our habitat activities. The picture you see behind me actually is, I'm quite proud of it, actually. It's a prairie area on my own land, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to bring up my presentation, and we'll go ahead and get started. So Advanced Pollinator Zones, or Pollinator Zones 201 as we like to call it, is a continuation from last week when I presented Pollinator Zones 101. But today what we're going to talk about in some depth is habitat restoration techniques and a term that, a fairly new innovative term called polliscaping with our friends from the Iowa State University Extension Service Master Gardeners. I will be introducing them here in just a little bit. But we're thrilled to have you. We have a lot of people on today, and you can see on this picture another example of a beautiful prairie at either sunrise or sunset. I'm not sure which one it is, but that's the whole idea, is trying to restore the landscape to native habitat and making sure each of us understands that we own that responsibility. So we started on the 23rd of May with these virtual presentations. Obviously, we're still in the midst of this pandemic crisis, and we just decided that unfortunately, rather than being able to have a large conference, which is what our intent was originally, we ended up having to do this virtually. So we're very sorry that we're not able to see all of you today, but we're also very happy that we have been able to do this. So the following week we did Pollinator Zones 101, and today we're doing Advanced Pollinator Zones. So looking forward then to next weekend, we're going to begin a two-part series on monarch rearing. This is really how it all got started, and I think you're going to really enjoy both of these presentations by Ken Watts and Mike Martin. It's a fascinating topic, it's a fascinating insect, and the work that we're doing on helping that insect to recover, both from a habitat perspective and from a rearing perspective, is what the Monarch Research Project is in a great part all about. I would remind you that if you have not registered for those yet, please do. You also can see each of these recorded webinars at monarchresearch.org in the events section. We have these recorded. They're going to be available on an ongoing basis, and we encourage you to take a look. You know, based on the 300 plus registrations we had for today's webinar, wow, thank you very much. It's pretty clear that this group is conservation minded. You want to make a difference, and you are biased towards action. So today's goal really is to provide information and answer your questions. And I want to make sure, I'm going to say this, and I said it last week several times, every prairie is different, and every prairie is different every year. This is a gravel road here in Linn County that you're seeing a picture of, and that is actually one of the earliest bloomers in the spring, the spiderwort. It's a beautiful flower. You see it all over the place, actually, in native habitat prairies around the county at this time of year. So I want to back up just for a second to our first presentation given by our founder, Clark McLeod, and remind everyone that what is the task at hand is addressing the issue of the habitat that we have destroyed, not only across Linn County, but across the state and across the planet. So at its base level, all of these plants, shrubs, trees are basically the basis of all the life in our biosphere, arguably all the life in the universe. But what's interesting about that layer is that it is supported in a great part by the next layer up, which is the insect population. Plants need insects, in many cases, specific insects to reproduce. There are millions and millions of species of each, but they together, plants and trees are what provide the life-sustaining energy to all of the rest of the food chain. Animals and us. And the us part is really the part that is important to understand, because the crisis that has been created by us, because in this case, humans have altered over 75% of the entire Earth's surface. We built buildings, we've built parking lots, we've talked about this before. Our job now, as we have suddenly seen this crisis come crashing down on us, the reduction of over 40% of the birds and insects in the last 30 or 40 years, is to restore habitat. And as you know, our friend Doug Tallamy has said that that goal has to be each one of us. Now, as we took on the challenge of rebuilding native habitat in Linn County, we really thought, okay, let's try to address this both with private landowners and using public land. We probably made more progress on the public land side than on the private land side, but that's what this whole Planting Forward movement is about, that we're trying to address during these series of webinars. All landowners, urban and rural, businesses, churches. What we're trying to achieve is basically, and we talked about this last week, is 5,000 pollinator zones over the next 5 years. But what that requires is all of you who are talking to us today to get involved, to talk to your neighbors, to talk to your local neighborhood development about this. How can we change that traditional look of grass mowed lawns and turn it towards native plants? On public land, we've made a lot of progress. 1,000 acres will be completed this next year on public land in parks, trails, golf courses, etc. And our work on the roadsides is making very good progress, with over 190 miles of roadside gravel roads in Linn County having now been planted with our mini prairies. Again, we're going to talk next week and the week after about helping to boost the monarch population, but our real goal here is to make Linn County a model, to have a spotlight shine on this little piece of geography here in the middle of the United States, for people to have the opportunity to see that something actually can be done, and it can be done in a very significant way and can be copied. Most of the reason that we're doing all this work is to understand the processes and procedures required to have this be successful, and then share those processes and procedures for other folks around the state, other folks around the country, and we hope that we can be successful with that. So we talked briefly about Doug Tallamy and his challenge. Basically, his goal for all of us is how much of your land is a dead zone, that is a mowed and sprayed lawn, versus a living landscape. A living landscape meaning full of pollinator plants and native plants that support that insect population that is so critical to the rest of the food chain as it goes up. His challenge is basically that we each consider converting 50% of our currently mowed and sprayed grass to native habitat of any kind, whether that's a native tree, a native shrub, native flowers. It's a big challenge, but the bottom line is if each one of us was willing to take that on, over 85% of all land in America is privately held. And that's important to understand, because we really all can make a difference. So our goals for today's webinar really are continuing to encourage native habitat in your own yard. We talked last week about getting it planted. We're going to continue a discussion on what to put in those plantings and how to maintain those. And then also a little bit towards the end, how to take care of it. Or you might want to think about taking out, and a discussion on an invasive species. So now it's my great opportunity to introduce our speaker today from the Master Gardeners, Carla McGrail. Carla and Linda and Becky, Linda Hinsman and Becky Lynch, are lifelong Master Gardeners, and over the years have taken a stronger and stronger interest in the notion of how to get native plants, native even host plants, into the landscape as you're thinking about your gardening techniques. They actually started a program with Master Gardeners called Planting for Pollinators, And we're very excited to have been an award winner this past year from the National Master Gardeners for their efforts in that regard. So she's going to spend 20 or 30 minutes followed by a discussion on prairie maintenance and habitat health that I will provide, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for presentations. So Carla, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Welcome. I'm here to talk to you about polliscaping. And this is a term that was developed by Becky. It's essentially using landscaping and developing landscaping through a pollinator's eyes. Anytime you are developing a landscape and designing a garden, you need to think about such things as where this plant is going, what kind of soil it's getting, what kind of light it's getting, how much moisture it's going to have, how tall it's going to get when it's going to bloom, but also taking into account the plant itself and how useful it is to pollinators in particular, and the environment in general is what we like to think of as polliscaping. First of all, basically, if you remember your middle school or your elementary school science, and what pollinating is essentially the plant's reproductive cycle, where it moves the pollen from the male part of the plant to the female part of the plant, or the female part of a different plant. And this is done many different ways. It's many plants are pollinated by the wind. It's sort of a haphazard process. Humans can pollinate manually. There are some mammals that do, but by and large, it's insects that are the biggest pollinators of plants, and in particular, it's bees and wasps, and bees in particular because of their nature and the way they're designed. They're the most efficient pollinators we have. A lot of people think of bees and they think of honeybees. They don't realize that, first of all, honeybees are not native bees. They are not from North America. They were brought here from Eurasia, and they are essentially livestock. People in the native plant, their native insect societies like to say that getting honeybees, putting in honeybees to support pollinators is a lot like putting in chickens to support birds. They're livestock, and they're great if you're trying to grow honey, or if you have particular pollination needs on your property. But by and far, the most important pollinating species we have are native bees. There are over 4,000 species of bees in North America, more than 400 in Iowa alone. Anything from the very, very tiny little sweat bees to our bumblebee, which is our largest native bee. And there are actually several dozen, I think, species of bumblebee. A lot of press has gone out about the rusty patch bumblebee being endangered, and that is just one species of bumblebee. Not all of them are endangered. So 90% of bees are solitary nesters. Our honeybees and bumblebees are colony nesters, but most of the other bees we have are solitary nesters. That means the female goes out and makes a nest and lays single eggs in, and the eggs develop on their own. They're not supported by anybody else. They just kind of grow on their own, and then they hatch out next year to a new generation of bees. 90% of the bees are solitary nesters. About 70% of the solitary nesters are ground nesting bees. They excavate holes or use old rodent holes and other insect holes and lay eggs and provide food. The female will lay an egg, and then she makes bee bread, and it's a combination of nectar and pollen, and she leaves that for when the egg hatches, the larva has something to eat, and it pupates, and then next year hatches out to a live bee. Here's some pictures of some different kind of native bees we have. What insects need from plants? From the flowers in particular, pollen provides protein. It's very important for the developing young, and nectar, which is carbohydrates, which provides energy. for both the developing young and also for the bees, the adult bees that are flying around. We have plants that you probably heard the term host plants, especially if you're into monarchs, which you probably are if you're part of our audience. And we know that milkweed is host plant for a monarch butterfly, and that monarchs can only eat milkweed. There are similar specialist relationships between pollinating insects and their host plants. And there are actually some species of bees that only will survive on one particular plant. If they don't have that, they won't reproduce, much like the monarchs. So, and when you have a host plant, that means that the plant that it hosts is going to be eaten by the insect. So the larvae will be right there and feeding on that host plant. So a lot of people will plant a butterfly garden and get alarmed that the plants are all being eaten by little worms. Well, that's the whole point. That's what you want. This other picture is a picture of a redbud tree, and it's got these holes. It looks like something's been eating the plant, but it's actually not a food source. This is the holes, these circular cuts are cut out from what's called a leaf cutter bee, and they bite off these circles of leaves, and then they use these leaf pieces to line their nest for their single eggs that they're laying. And they make different cells in a tube underground or in a stem. So it's not necessarily something eating, but you can see that just like around the edge. So plants vary considerably in their usefulness to the ecosystem. I kind of like to think of it as a spectrum. On one end, you have your native plants, which are very useful. A native plant, by definition, has developed in the landscape along with the insects that are feeding, and so it has a special relationship. And then the other end of the spectrum, you have the hybridized non-native plants. This is a picture of a hydrangea. This plant has been hybridized to the point that it is sterile. As far as I know, there are no host relationships with any insects. It's still a beautiful plant. It's sort of like a living sculpture in your garden. In between these, we have something called nativars, and this is kind of confusing. A nativar is a plant that has been in production. It's a native plant that has been sometimes hybridized, sometimes collected in nature and reproduced, usually asexually by leaf cuttings and so forth, to be sold. And so they really vary a lot. There's a lot of studies being done of nativars in their usefulness to the plants, to the insects, in the insect world. And then we have the normal landscaping plants, which we are oftentimes, not always, but usually non-native, exotics, they're called. And this picture of a Mexican sunflower. The Mexican sunflower happens to bloom very prolifically in the season when the monarchs are migrating, and it is a very good nectar source for many different insects. So even though it's not native and it's exotic, it's kind of it's a pretty plant, and it is useful also. So, but the problem with a lot of exotic plants is they're the ones that tend to become invasive. Polliscaping garden tips. I think that usually when you see native plants, they're not usually in a very formal garden design. And we got to go to the Mount Cuba Botanical Gardens and Center in Delaware last summer and tour. They have native plant. They're devoted to studying native plants, and they have a very formal garden setup that is all native plants, and it was very, very exciting to see that, because I think that part of what is going to really help native plants be used more widespread is that people see them used in formal designs and so forth. Not everybody wants a prairie in their yard. Some people need a very formal setting, and so native plants can be used that way, and it's good to see. And also, there's things you can do when you're incorporating native plants into your garden that help make them more acceptable. One of the things is having mown areas around the edge of your garden. and any way to kind of delineate that this is indeed a landscaped area. Might be stepping stones, other garden elements like sculpture or so forth in it, or fencing, and signs, which are very useful in helping to describe what it is you're doing and help to educate the public too, and spread the word of the value of native plants and your appreciation for them. Every change happens, every change helps along the way. Not everybody has space for a large native plant or even a small prairie in their small landscape yards, but there's still places for native plants in everybody's garden. I think for instance, if you are losing your ash tree to the emerald ash borer and you want to replace it with another shade tree, then consider a native plant, another native plant. Ash trees are native, but there's lots of other native varieties that are available that help support insect populations. There's lots of shrubs, and I'm going to show you a lot of some of our favorite plants. These are some that Becky and Linda and I kind of put together. Many times when you see native plant designs, they tend to be, kind of a large mass. Well, the sun-loving native plants that we have in our area are prairie plants, and we live in what is the tallgrass prairie, so these tend to be very large plants and very bold, and so they look best when they're planted in large, bold situations. That includes grouping multiple plants together and large swaths of plants, and this actually is beneficial to the pollinators too, because then they can find these flowers easier when they're planted in masses. And these are some pictures from our gardens, most of them. So anyway, I'm going to go through and show you some trees and shrubs and some other landscape plants and forbs and so forth. Trees are especially important for the early bees that are foraging in the early spring. There's not much out there that's available to insects that are foraging in March and April. And so this is where the trees are very important. If you look out into a forested area, a lot of times you will see, the first things you'll see that are budding in the spring are the willow trees. The pussy willow is a native tree or a shrub, depending on how it's grown. It is a very nice landscaping plant, and it attracts a multitude of insects and those early season bees that need pollen and nectar. And many people don't realize this, but maple trees are actually an important source of food for the early bees too, because they bloom before they leaf out, and so a lot of people don't realize that fuzzy stuff is flowers, and there's bees up there in the trees. And the downy service berry is one of the types of service berries. There's lots of varieties, but they're beautiful small tree or large shrub that gets beautiful white flowers in the spring and edible berries in the summer and fall color in the autumn. We have lots of native shrubs. Many of them actually are available in commercial landscaping. If you look, unfortunately, a lot of times they're not labeled as such, so you kind of have to know what you're looking for. The nine bark is a native shrub. It's blooming now in early June, and it attracts an abundant number of pollinators. This is a picture from my nine bark. It's a nativar called Diablo, so it has this dark foliage on it, which is pretty, and I like to go out there and just watch the bees on it. And this is a picture of a viceroy butterfly that I took several years ago in my nine bark. There's several different viburnum that are available in the whole horticultural world that have been, reproduced for landscaping plants. This is an arrowwood viburnum, which is named arrowwood because it has like long straight stems that the Indians used for arrows, apparently. It's white flowers in the summer, and the buttonbush is a really lovely small or large shrub that I think we should see more of, frankly, in horticultural industry. Like I said, there's not a lot of early blooming flowers, and most of the early blooming flowers we have, native plants, tend to be woodland plants and spring ephemerals. And the pasque-flower is actually one of the few prairie plants that we have that bloom very early in March and April. It's a very lovely, small, only gets about 6 inches high, and quickly, after it's done blooming, is covered up by taller native plants. This is my favorite spring ephemeral. It's called a snow trillium. I've actually never seen one in the wild, but it is a native plant, and I have some in my woodland garden. And it blooms, when it's in bloom in early April, I see bees on it right away, which there's not much else out. So, but there's bees there ready for it. So, the bloodroot is a very popular woodland wildflower. It spreads in a nice mass, and it is. I think it's the white of the petals is the whitest white on the planet. It just glows in the woodlands. It's a beautiful plant. Prairie smoke is another sun-loving prairie plant that actually blooms in the early spring. The bloom is actually you see in the background, the closed-up reddish thing. That's the plant in bloom, and the fluffy stuff is actually the seed head, which is much more attractive than the bloom itself. And you will see bees sometimes, especially bumblebees, that can pry open the flower and get at the nectar and the pollen. It likes well-drained soil, so it's kind of a good, even gravelly area. Purple coneflower is the plant that is probably most widely adapted for horticultural industry. You will see hundreds of varieties of echinacea and crossing the purple coneflower with other echinacea. So the purple coneflower is no longer always purple, and but in its pure form, in its native form, it's a splendid wildflower, and it has the added bonus that the seeds in the wintertime are eaten by birds, especially our goldfinch, which is our state bird. We have wild bergamot. This is a plant with 3 names: wild bergamot, speebalm, or monarda. We'll hear it called all 3. It has these tubular lilac-colored flowers that are very attractive to long-tongued bees, such as bumblebees, and also hummingbirds. It grows in the full sun, and it is abundant in the wild. You will see it roadsides, and especially in the areas that the mini prairies are planted. Butterfly weed. This is like probably my favorite of the milkweeds, because it's orange. For one thing, it's bright orange, brilliant plant, and small leaves. It is a host for monarch butterflies. It likes well-drained soil. It especially can't tolerate wetness in the winter. And it stays put. It grows. It spreads slowly, but it doesn't get too weedy. And it is beautiful. You see it along the roadsides. Rattlesnake master. This is a plant that I think deserves a more popular spread as a landscaping plant. It's called yuccifolium because the leaves look like a yucca plant, very spiky, and then it sends up the shoot with these tall club-like flowers on it. It's a nice prairie plant. And then probably the blazing star liatris, the best one I think is the meadow blazing star, which gets these kind of bulb-like purple projections. When you have this, you will guaranteed to have monarch butterflies on it. It's just an absolute monarch butterfly magnet, and it's blooming right when they're trying to bulk up for their long migration. So. Here we have the New England aster. This is also a plant that's very popular in horticultural production. A lot of times there are cultivars of it that will have names like Almapashki, so it's slightly different color, but in its strict native sense, it is a tall grass prairie plant, so it gets quite tall. But one of the things you can do to help kind of rein it in a regular garden situation is to keep it cut back. I went out this week and cut all my mine back by half, and this causes it to make new branches and actually makes more flowers, and it makes it kind of more denser, but not as tall. Because otherwise, it'll end up laying down on your lawn. So other things you can do at your landscape to help protect, to support pollinators, is to provide a water source, especially in the hot, dry days of the dead of summer, when there's not like rain puddles here and there. Bees do need moisture, and butterflies, and they like to puddle in shallow areas. So even putting rocks in your bird baths will help, so they have someplace to land where they can get moisture. You don't need to clean your garden up. This is hard for people to appreciate this, but it's better to leave all the dead things in the fall and through the winter. It actually provides winter interest. It provides shelter for overwintering insects and food source for birds over the winter. A lot of the seeds are edible. And then when you go to clean up your garden in the spring, we ask that you don't cut everything back to the ground, that you leave the tall stems like your aster stems and that sort of thing, cut them back to about 12 to 15 inches, because this becomes housing for the solitary cavity nesting bees that will lay eggs down into the hollow stems. And so last year's flowers become the nesting site for this year's bees, for next year's bees. So, and the plants that will quickly grow up around them, it looks a little awkward for a couple of weeks in the spring, but very soon the plants will fill out and you won't even see them anymore. Leaving dead logs, sticks, or even dead trees, if you have the room on your property, provides good habitat for wood-boring insects and bees, a lot of bees that live in that situation. Leaving area of bare soil, I mean, you don't have to cover every square inch with mulch, leaving areas where the mason bees can collect soil to seal off their nests, and where the ground nesting bees have areas where they can burrow into the soil to lay their eggs. And consider letting things grow in your lawn besides grass. I figure if you can mow it and it's green, then it's a lawn. Mow your grass longer and allow some flowers to survive in there. It provides food for pollinators. Violets are actually, considered a lawn weed, but they are a native plant, and they are a host plant for fritillary butterflies. And most important of all is don't kill the pollinators. There's very few instances where you really actually need to use insecticides outside the home. And frankly, I can't even think when those would be. If you feel you have to use something to kill bugs that are troublesome, use the least harmful you can. Insecticidal soap, a lot of times, will do the trick, or a blast of water from the hose will knock off unwanted insects like aphids. And you don't even need any chemicals at all, but use the least toxic, which tend to be the insecticides that you apply directly to the insects that you have to contact them to kill. And then, and don't use systemic insecticides, because by nature they're taken up by the plants and make all parts of the plant poisonous. If you apply insecticides, don't do it when the plant's in flower, and certainly don't apply them on the flowers. And do it at night when the pollinators and the insects are not flying, or in the evening. And be sure and read and follow all label directions. And probably the biggest problem with being a native plant enthusiast is trying to find the plants. I've seen a massive change in the last 5 or 10 years, that there's so much more available out there than there used to be, which is wonderful, but it's still, not common to find native plants. And a lot of times if you do, they're not labeled as such, or you'll see things that are labeled as native or wildflowers, which truly aren't. They're not native plants, because those terms are not regulated. There's a lot of mail order native plant nurseries. There's fewer that are available, to retail and stop in. And I think until that happens, it's going to be a hump to get over for native plants to be accepted. We need to be able to just go down to the nearby nursery and grab them. I've seen a lot more native plants in the nurseries every year. It tend to be at like the locally owned nurseries, and ask for them. Let the nurseries know that that's what you're interested in. This is a picture of winter native seed sowing. We were talking about doing a project like this, having a workshop this fall or winter where we can plant native seeds. These are grown in milk jugs, and by planting them in milk jugs with drainage, and you leave them out all winter, and it mimics the conditions they need in nature. Plus, you have a contained area, so the seedlings are protected. So, hopefully, we can do that this year. And if you have friends who are native plant enthusiasts, they're probably willing to share. I know I give away a lot of plants, and that's fine. I am happy to share them. So. And remember the pollinators, plant for the pollinators. And don't forget that this year, National Pollinator Week is Monday, June 22nd through Sunday, June 28th. So go out and plant some native plants for the pollinators to celebrate that time. And that's all I got. Thank you. Take it away, Jim.
Carla, thank you so much. And just a super job. I am so impressed with our friends at the Master Gardeners. They've been just great partners with us, and from the very beginning, quite frankly, and we really, really appreciate you very much. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen now, and so let's shift gears just a little bit. If you remember last week, I got basically through to the point where if you had done your seedbed preparation and planted your seed late in the year, November, even December, we were basically wishing you congratulations and telling you to be patient. And that's certainly the case. But once things start to grow in the spring, you will have some work to do. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. So again, last week we talked about the most frequently asked question that we get, and that is anything good growing in my little prairie? What you need to understand is that weeds green up and grow way faster than brand new native prairie seeds. And so as a result of that, for the first year and then part of the second year, you A, will have lots of weeds, and B, you're going to need to trim them. Now, we usually say either mow or weed whack. The truth of the matter is most mowers will not go this high. Basically, what you want to do is when the plant area is over 10 to 12 to 14 inches, you want to whack it back into that 6 to 8 inch height. You don't want to go too low, or you can hurt the native plants that are starting to come up. You can do it as often as you want in the first year. It's hard to do, but it works. Again, you need to keep it trimmed back. The purpose for that really is to allow the sunlight to get down to that ground that you planted this in, because most native plants are spending their first part of their life putting down roots. And again, the root systems in some of these native plants are spectacular. For example, the giant blue stem, we've seen root systems go down as much as 12 to 13 feet. So you think about the benefit that provides to the soil, to water quality, to water runoff. It's just amazing. But for the first year, you will have weeds. Then in the second year, you should trim once more to that 8 to 10 inch height. And after that second year, your prairie should start to fill in. I won't kid you that you will have some difficult weeds that will try to enter. I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. If you have to, and you have, Canada thistles starting to really spread, you may have to spot spray or dig them out, but that should be minimal. So I'm going to take you through a few examples of some common weeds and talk a little bit about that. So, hopefully you all recognize what you're looking at here. Velvet leaf, ragweed, foxtail, mare's tail. These are all very, very common weeds. And again, I want you to understand that you can weed by hand if you have the gumption and can identify the species, but most weeds will be taken care of with that first and second year trimming. I'm not even going to use the word mowing because I actually haven't seen a mower that can get up to 8 inches high. So you're going to have to keep it trimmed. And, you know, if you don't have a weed whacker, you can use a hedge trimmer, a hedge clipper, shears if you have to, especially if it's a 10 by 10. It's not that difficult to go after it. But, you know, taking a look here, this is Canada thistle as an example. It is a nasty invasive here in Iowa. It is considered a noxious weed, actually, and you're probably going to get some. Wear heavy gloves if you're going to pull it. It's got really, really nasty thorns on it. But if you see them and they're easy to spot, they're easy to recognize, I would suggest pulling them out. Crown vetch is another plant that is very aggressive. It's actually was used back in the 70s in the roadsides, and again, it's very invasive. And if you see it, again, if you have the opportunity to pull it out, pull it out. You can see the size of the plant against the petals of grass that are basically right next to it. So you get a sense of the size of that plant. This is another thistle called the bull thistle. It's a biennial, again, nasty little guy, very easily recognizable as a bad guy in your prairie. And if you have the gumption, dig them out because they get quite large and they can block out other species that are trying to have an opportunity to grow. Sorry about that. You know, this one is actually bird's foot trefoil. It's a very pretty picture of a very, very invasive, nasty little weed. It's kind of in that legume clover family. You'll see it most of the time along the edges of things. And it's very aggressive, very difficult to get rid of, actually hard to pull because of the root system that it puts down. But again, it's something that if you see these little clovery yellow flowers, don't mistake them for partridge pea, but they're pretty easily recognizable. You can go ahead and try to take those out as well. Sweet clover is another one that you know, all of us recognize and will spread very, very quickly. The root systems are very invasive and move quickly. You can see that plant right next to these blades of grass. So this is a very young identification of that species. So that's just kind of taking you through some ideas of what you might see in terms of what we usually describe as either good guys or bad guys. So last week we talked about the good guys. This week we talked a little bit about the bad guys. But just remember that in that first year, you will probably have a 50-50 split of weeds. And if you start to see some species, some native species coming up, that means you're okay. It means you just got to be patient and you've got to do that trimming. It's an absolute must. Now, I will say in the second year, if you have a complete overgrown, no natives, you may have to start over, but this seldom happens. Actually, most prairies are successful, particularly if you have a decent site and you were meticulous about seed bed preparation. And I can't stress that enough. Again, 80% of a successful prairie is proper seed bed preparation. And it requires patience. Again, if you see prairie species, keep doing that weed whacking high and let the species do their thing because it takes time and patience, but it's worth it. So what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions. We have a bunch of questions that have come in, and I'm going to go ahead and read some of these questions, and Carla and I will tag team pulling these together. So let me go to the questions here, and let's see. I'll start with this one. Will I have to weed or weed whack my pollinator zone forever? Or will it take care of itself after a while? No, you don't have to weed whack it forever. You know, this prairie that you see behind me is, I think now today, 10 years old. I think when this picture was taken, it was 8 years old. And it's pretty self-sufficient. It's grown in, the species are pretty varied in here. I think there's like 50 or 60 different varieties of seed in this particular prairie. So once it fills in, it really becomes quite self-sufficient. Now, at the same time, I've had areas in here where I've had Canada thistle and I've had to do some spot spraying. I had an infestation one year of Japanese hops, and I had to deal with that. But no, you don't have to weed whack. If you're in the county and you have the opportunity once every 3 or 4 years to burn it, it's a very worthwhile thing to do. Burning prairie in a prescribed fire. Again, you want to be careful. We don't want to set your house on fire or anything like that. But burning is actually a very good practice as well. Let's see, where can I find these plants locally so that I can add them to my yard? Why don't we'll both take this one. I do just simply want to say that I want to give a shout out specifically to Cedar River Garden Center out in Palo. I was there recently, and they had, gosh, 30 different varieties of native plants that you could purchase. To be fair, they weren't cheap. They were not inexpensive, but they were very healthy, very nice plants, 4 different species of milkweed, and some really nice looking Joe Pye weed, and so on and so forth. So check them out. But as Carla said, you know, the nurseries have improved, but they have a long ways to go. So Carla, you have anything else you'd want to add to that?
Oh, no. Like I said, there are a lot of native plant nurseries online that unfortunately a lot of them are sold out of plants this year, which is great. Glad to see it. But so, you know, hopefully that shows that there'll be more available. And like I said, we, you know, with seeds and sharing and plant sales locally are a good source. So.
Okay. Let's see. Are the master gardeners available for follow-up questions that I have? Carla, you want to take that one?
Yes, we are always around for follow-up questions. That's what we do best. We maintain what's called the Hotline, which is a phone-in service. It's area code 319-447-0647. That's at the Linn County Extension Office. There's master gardeners there, and we have a voicemail. And if they don't know, they can get in touch with someone who does know or find the answer. And also, the email is Linn County Master Gardener, all one word, @gmail.com. And if you specifically want to ask me, you can have them forward the question on to me, or contact through Monarch Research. They know how to get hold of me too. So.
Great, thank you. And I've actually used that Hotline before, and it is really very, very helpful. Let's see. Okay, I'd like to help the monarch butterfly as it migrates north to Iowa. Do you have any specific recommendations for early spring pollinator plants? Same question for the fall as the monarchs begin their migration south. So sure, throw a few out here for you. In terms of the early spring, you know, I think that Carla has already answered the question about that April-May timeframe, and that is most of what you see are going to be blooming trees and woodland species. But in terms of prairie plants, and specifically in our seed mix, probably the earliest blooming prairie plant in terms of native plants in Iowa would be the golden Alexander. And that's a really interesting plant because it's quite pretty, but it also looks a lot like a wild parsnip. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's a good guy and a bad guy. Talk about a really good guy and talk about a really bad guy. But golden Alexanders are a good example. Spiderwort is another example. I showed that picture at the beginning. Spiderwort does start to appear in that sort of May, early June timeframe. There's quite a bit of it out actually right now. White wild indigo is another one that you're going to start to see here. And I was out on my bicycle on the Cedar Valley Nature Trail this last weekend, and there was a ton of foxglove beard tongue starting to bloom as well. There was a lot of it, and I'm really pleased by that, by the way, because that's a great species, and it is in our seed mix as well. At the end of the year, what you're going to obviously, well, really the star of the show is the aster, as Carla has already said. The New England aster is probably the latest blooming plant. It is very highly attractive to monarchs that are gearing up for the 2,000-mile journey to Mexico. You see them on the asters all the time. There's several varieties of aster that are that are native, that are not hybridized. And so you'll see those also in the landscape. The other one is showy goldenrod. That is a plant that, again, monarchs love, and it grows, kind of blooms in that August, September, October timeframe. So, Carla, anything to add there?
No, I think you got it.
Okay. So it says, I hang things in my garden to catch flies and gnats. Should I not do that? I'll let you take that one, Carla.
Well, it's kind of a value decision. A lot of times those traps are actually a pheromone trap, and studies have shown that they actually attract more than they actually get rid of. I mean, they attract them, but you'll end up with more because you're attracting them. So probably the best way to avoid flies and gnats are repellents or fans. You're not going to catch enough that it's really going to impact the general population, I don't think. So, it's not a bad thing. It's kind of psychologically enjoyable to see those things that are bothering you get caught, but so yes and no.
Okay, this one, it says, should I be careful not to include plants that attract ground bees? I'm concerned that I may step on them.
No, not at all. That's why they nest in the ground, is because they're safe. You can step on them. You would never know. They won't know. And if you're planting flowers that are attractive to bees, you are attracting flowers that are attracted to ground nesting bees. So no, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Okay,
do different native plants require different types of soil, or do I need to group certain ones together that use the same soil consistency? Interestingly enough, when you plant native prairie, across a larger area, let's call it as small as a quarter of an acre, you're actually going to run across multiple different soil types, and you're going to run across multiple different moisture substrates as well. But there's a bunch of varieties in these seed mixes. So what you'll actually end up with, what I said at the very beginning, every prairie is different, and every prairie is different every year. And that's going to be a function of what's going on in the soil, what's going on in terms of the light, what's going on in terms of the slope, and what's going on in terms of the moisture. And so that's kind of how I would address that question. You certainly can plant groups of plants that are particular to that particular type of soil. I happen to have very heavy clay out here on this piece of property. I mean, some of it's so thick that you could throw pottery with it. These prairie plants do pretty darn well here. And so I think it's just a matter of how picky you want to be about it. Carl, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree. In a smaller landscaping situation, you do have to kind of pay attention. If you plant something that needs a lot of moisture in a raised bed that's not going to get a lot of moisture, it's not going to survive there. So you do have to take that into consideration. Makes much less work if you put the right plant in the right place. But nature will sort it out, like Jim said, eventually. So, but if you're paying $15 for a plant, you want to be particular about where you're putting it.
Well said. Well said. Let's see. Can I plant pollinator-friendly plants in partial shade?
Yes. There are a lot of plants that will do well in part shade. A lot of these are plants that are naturally on the woodland edge or in oak savannas. And surprisingly, even a lot of things that we think of as traditional prairie plants will take a fair amount of shade, not deep shade all day, but if they get several hours of direct sun during the day, it's actually enough. So, like I think particularly like the bee balm, but there are a lot of species. There's a type of Joe Pye weed called the sweet Joe Pye weed, which is actually a shade-loving plant. So it's attracted to pollinators also. So yes, and most of the native plant nurseries, have very extensive online information about the growing conditions of all these plants, which is an excellent resource. So.
Carla, is it important to plant in large clumps of the same species?
It's best. It's the foraging insects. It makes it easier for them if they don't have to fly as far, because a lot of them, their entire lifetime is spent in a pretty small area. So the more you have in a small area that's attractive to them, the better their life is. And also it's easier for them to find it in the first place. If if you have monarchs that are flying overhead, they're going to be attracted to a large clump of blooming flowers where they might miss one in your yard. So it's not absolutely necessary, but it has its benefits. So.
And I would just add that if you're, if you're planting a seed bed native prairie with for example, in our mix with 40 different species in it, that's not going to create, quote, a clump of the same kind of species, but it is going to create a clump of pollinator-friendly species in a clump area. Okay, so I think it addresses the same question that Carla was answering, but kind of in a different way.
If you call it a sweep, it makes it elegant. So the sweep of the same plant. So.
Let's see, do I have to fertilize the pollinator zone? You do not.
No, and actually it's really actually detrimental to fertilize native plants because they are adapted to grow in our soil here, and the soil in its natural state has everything it wants and needs, and by fertilizing native plants, a lot of times you end up with very leggy growth, and it's detrimental, so no, I would not.
Let's see, what is the recommended best plant identification app? Well, I'll tell you, I use an app called iNaturalist. It is sponsored by National Geographic magazine and the National Geographic Society, I should say. And I find it to be really accurate. And you can also use it to identify young species as well. It's basically one of those apps where all of the people who use it are also able to provide feedback and provide input, provide photographs and so on and so forth. So for a particular species that you take a picture of, or a particular bird that you take a picture of, it will immediately come back with suggestions, and they're usually right. So it's about 99% right. Carly, you have anything to add on that one?
No, that's good.
Let's see, if I'm weed whacking my new prairie and I see a thistle or a dandelion, can I chop it with a weed whacker? Will it damage the natives? Well, I guess it depends on how good you are at it, but I would say no. In other words, if it's a large area, you can probably get away with it. But in a 10-foot by 10-foot plot, if you start putting the weed whacker down on the ground, you're probably going to damage the baby native plants that are trying to compete down in there. And so I would not recommend it. Let's see, I'm interested and I would attend a fall workshop to learn more about how to grow native plants. Well, obviously we're still hoping that we'll have our landowner forum this fall. It's become an annual tradition, and it's become quite an event. We have Doug Tallamy coming back to Cedar Rapids in October to join us for that entire weekend. I think it's in the second week of October. So stay tuned on that. If we don't do it live, we'll do it this way. And so I think that kind of takes us to the end of our questions. So I will go back. So again, if you have not already, please register to become a pollinator zone. It's really imperative that each of us take on this responsibility. Remember that every prairie is different, and every prairie is different every year. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Look at this beautiful shot. And that it does require patience. Sometimes it's going to take 5 years, 6 years, 7 years for the prairie to become rich and have this kind of a look to it. But it's worth it, isn't it? So planning forward is our most significant gift to the next generation. We appreciate the time that you've spent with us today. Thank you all for joining us. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.